Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Rutherford County School Board special called session tonight to discuss the director's contract. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance, and we're honored tonight. Commissioner Gurley is with us, and he is going to lead us. Commissioner Gurley, please.
Would you join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner, and welcome everyone. The only order of business tonight is the Director of Schools contract. We've got to formulate a new one, add some things perhaps, take some things off, change some dates, salaries, whatever. And leading us in the discussion tonight on the various items will be our attorney, Mr. Jeff Reed. And Mr. Reed, I know you're always ready to go, so take it away, sir.
Sure, thank you. Glad to be with you. I've given you some information there before the meeting you can take a look at. One, this first set of information I want to comment on just briefly is with regard, there was a lot of discussion when we were in the Director of Schools search about how our salary for Director of Schools here in Rutherford County compares to other salaries throughout Tennessee. I did obtain information from the Tennessee School Board Association based on 2017 rates. They had all collected information for all the counties in Tennessee, and you have a sheet there that tells you what all the counties were paying their Director of Schools in 2017. You can see kind of how Rutherford County, we'll look and see what, we're getting to the salary here in a second, but you're going to see what other counties in Middle Tennessee were paying. And if you look in here, I highlighted a few of the Middle Tennessee counties, and some of these are much smaller than we are, but Maury County, for instance, in 2017 paid their superintendent, and this is on the sheet that kind of has a long list of county names here, but the Maury County paid $180,000 to their Director of Schools in 2016. You flip over and see Sumner County, they paid their Director of Schools $191,646. Williamson County was at $260,000, and Wilson County was $165,000. And of course, Davidson County is in here as well. That's I don't know how akin that is to Rutherford County, but you see they paid well in excess of $200,000 for their Director of Schools in Davidson County. But if you see, we're the lowest of all the Middle Tennessee counties here. We talked about in Director of Schools salary based on what our current salary rates are for Director of Schools. So also, I just want to comment, bring that to your attention so you see the detail of that. At some point, that's an issue the board is going to have to address, because to the extent we're falling behind all the other counties in Middle Tennessee, it puts us at a disadvantage with respect to future recruiting, and just puts us out of line with respect to what salaries are for Director of Schools in Tennessee. The other information I gave you is information from the Tennessee Organization of School Superintendents, known as TOS, and this is information they had compiled last year as well with respect to 2017 salaries. And you'll see the information they compiled is reflective of the same information the TSBA reflects there, that really with respect to school systems, they have categorized the school systems according to size and number of students. For school systems of 25,000 plus students, the average base salary was $225,000. The median base salary was $225,000 in 2017, and that's in Middle Tennessee. You'll also see on a statewide basis, for systems larger than 25,000 students, the average base salary was $226,400. The median base was $198,500. So again, Rutherford County is well below that, and that's consistent with what you heard from Randall Bennett was here from TSBA when he discussed that issue with the board. I bring that to your attention just to say this is a matter which at some point we're going to have to address. We will need to be plugging into a salary amount into the contract tonight for Director of Schools, and we'll get to that here in just a second. But I wanted you to have that information. The other document you have before you is the is a proposed draft of a contract for the director of schools with Mr. Spurlock. This is based on Mr. Odom's previous contract and made a couple of changes and cleaned it up in regard to a few matters, which I'll go through with you item by item, let you know what the changes that were made were. But the first thing I want to highlight is with respect to the first thing we need to address with respect to the contract is under Section 1, the term of the contract, which controls how long the director of schools will be serving in the position pursuant to this contract. What we did with Mr. Odom, we had in his initial contract was a term of 3 years. So I've gone ahead and plugged that 3 years in here for now. You can choose whatever term so long as the term is no longer than 4 years. Under state law, the maximum term for a director of schools is 4 years. So I went ahead and plugged in 3 years based on what we did with Mr. Odom, but it's within the board's discretion to change that to 1, 2, or 4 years should you choose to do that. So you see that item in paragraph 1. So if it is a 3-year contract, then this contract would terminate June 30th, 2021. The other, I'll go through and kind of note the changes we did from Mr. Odom's contract, so you see what those are. The salary is on page 3 of the contract. And we plugged in the salary to be $156,316. That's Mr. Odom's current salary. So that's the current, that does not account for any increases that would have been made in July. Would any increase have been made in July? So $156,316 is the current director of schools salary. So the way this currently reads, it says beginning July 1st, 2019, the director's salary shall be adjusted to match any salary increases or bonuses approved by the board to its general certified school employees. So to the extent you're increasing teacher salaries, the director of school salary will go up an equivalent percentage on that same percentage basis. So that, and of course, the salary is an item which you can change and deal with tonight should you wish to deal with it. You can also address when you want to have any increases kick in and when you want those to start. What we did with Mr. Odom, we had the increases start the year after he became director of schools. So that's why I have inserted in the contract now to just be to base this on what we did for Mr. Odom last time. You'll see Section 6 there talks about the benefits the director of schools is entitled to, which includes insurance, life insurance, the personal day, 1/2 personal day, well, 1 personal day for each half year of employment, and paid holidays as approved by the board. This is all the same as what we had with Mr. Odom's contract. So there's not been any changes with regard to the benefit section of the contract from what Mr. Odom had in his contract. It also says the board will pay the cost of the director's membership in the American Association of School Administrators, in the Tennessee Organization of School Superintendents, and the Rutherford County Chamber of Commerce. Again, that's the same as what we did with Mr. Odom. I'll highlight here just Section 7 is professional growth. This, again, just a standard provision that we have for the director of schools to continue to have a training and receive ongoing current training with respect to the latest laws and regulations that affect the operation of a school system. In Section 8, you see the vacation and sick days are the same as what Mr. Odom had. It says director shall be entitled to 24 working days paid vacation each fiscal year. And they can be accrued and carried forward based on school system policy. That's the same as what we had for Mr. Odom. With respect to any vacation days, the director of school has to notify the chairman if he's going to be gone for 2 days or more. That's the same as what we did with Mr. Odom in that regard. Paragraph 10 is a liability insurance provision. Basically says the director of schools is covered by the county's insurance in regard to their official actions taken in their capacity as director of schools. In paragraph 11, it deals with goals and objectives. What we did with Mr. Odom is we said within 60 days after he took office that he was to develop a system of attainable goals with the board that y'all could then use to measure how well he was doing as director of schools. So I included that same provision in here again, and this says, currently it says, within 60 days after July 1st, 2018, or such earlier time as the board and director agree, the board and director shall meet to establish a system of attainable and measurable goals and objectives for the ensuing school year and an implementation plan. So 60 days is what we had in Mr. Odom's contract. If you think that's too short, you could argue that's too short because that's starting in July, and that gives him July and August. So by September 1st, you would have to have that done. You've gotten some new director of school, you've got some new board members coming on the board. So if we want to delay that, it may be something that you want to delay and push that back to a later date. I went ahead and left the 60 days because that's what we had for Mr. Odom. But if you want to push it back to 120 days or a later date, I think that's within a reason to do, particularly since you do have some new board members who are becoming on the board. So that's one item you may want to look at. In Section 13, this is a provision I added based on to make it consistent with board policy and kind of current law, and provided for complaints and grievances by employees against the director. And the board has always had policy 5.501 that provided for any complaints against the director of schools could be brought before the Board of Education, should there be any. What we did just incorporate that into the contract here, so if there is a complaint by an employee against the director of schools, that is to be investigated by the board attorney or another designee of the board to undertake the investigation. The report then comes to you, and then you take such action as a board as you deem to be appropriate at that time. So that simply incorporates the terms of policy 5.501. Section 14 provides to termination of the contract. This is the same as we have for Mr. Odom. There's basic provision dealing for termination for cause and termination without cause. The board can terminate this contract for cause on any grounds that would justify the dismissal of a tenured teacher. So if something happens that would justify the dismissal of a tenured teacher, that would also give you authority to terminate this contract. And in that case, the board is not obligated to pay any compensation to the director after the effective date of that termination. The board also has the right to terminate this for any reason at any time should you choose to do that. So there is, you'll see on page 9, the unilateral termination by the board. And if you choose to do that without cause, you just decide that you want to make a change in the director position without good cause, you can do that. But at that point, you're obligated to pay the director of schools the balance of the amount of money they're due under the contract. And these are all provisions in Mr. Odom's contract. I'll just point those out to you. The director also can resign at any time by giving the board a minimum of 30 days advance notice. So, and if you have a resignation, you have to get an interim director in place and then make a decision about hiring a full-time director. In Section 15, I added a section again to make it kind of consistent with current law with respect to suspension in the event there's any kind of ongoing investigation that comes up that involves the director of schools that you think may warrant termination. You can wait and go ahead and suspend that director of schools during the course of that investigation until you get the outcome of it, and then you can ultimately make a decision after that investigation is concluded. It says you have the right to put an interim director in place for that short-term period. You would have to continue to pay the director of schools his salary during that suspended period. That's akin to what we do with teachers now and other administrators and with similar type matters. So that's just incorporating those provisions into the contract that we have with our other employees already. And other thing in Section 17, I just note there's no guarantee to a return of the prior position. So there's no guarantee. You have no obligation to return the director of schools back to principal of Oakland High School. So at some point, whenever this contract ends, either by its own expiration or you renew it, and at some point Mr. Spurlock retires or chooses not to retire, there's no obligation to return him to Oakland High School. That's something that could be done should the then director of schools choose to do it, but you have no obligation to do that. That's the same provision we had in the contract with Mr. Odom in his capacity. So that's really the highlights of the contract, because this is largely the same as what we had with Mr. Odom. If you have any questions about it, I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Mr. Reed?
Yes.
I'd like to talk about the salary and the salary comparisons for a minute.
Sure.
And I appreciate the fact that all this research was done in terms of, analyzing other counties and like-sized school systems. But from a different perspective, I think when we look at these salaries, we have to make sure that we're comparing, as they say, the old saying goes, apples to apples. For instance, when I look at your $180,000 for the superintendent of Maury County, the questions that would raise in my mind also are, how long has that superintendent been in their position? Do they have a doctorate degree, which I know doesn't matter to us anymore, but do they have one? And how qualified were they when they went into that position? In other words, all those criteria, because I think when we address salary for our new director of schools, those are things that really have to be looked at in the whole analysis of the salaries to begin with.
Yeah, I agree with all those comments because you cannot tell from TSBA's report here what degrees the particular individual had. Or how long, if they had been an experienced director of school somewhere else, or so forth.
And I would think, and again, a lot of that conversation about having to look at higher salary levels too, a lot of that conversation was kind of circled around what are we going to have to pay, especially if we got somebody from outside the system or someone that had 10 years of experience as a director of schools. So I think the circumstances are a little bit different as well as comparing to Mr. Odom's salary, since he's been on the job for how many years now?
You'll see in TOS's information they provided with respect to Middle Tennessee contract information, they saw the average length of the current contract was 3.44 years, and they had the average years of experience as director in the current district of like 5.1.
Where is that? Am I missing?
This is there on the TOS report.
Oh.
It's labeled Middle Tennessee contract information. It gives you kind of the averages that TOS had gathered with respect to their information, which does not answer your question with respect to an individual like Mr. Spurlock, who has no prior director of schools experience in the position. Of course, he has none at all yet, but he has extensive school system experience. So, but your points are well taken. And I just offer those numbers to give you some idea of what other school systems are paying, because it was an issue that Reynold Bennett had, I think, raised, and the numbers do bear out kind of that it is a concern. At some point, this board will have to address.
Okay. What is Mr. Spurlock's current salary?
Oh, I don't know Mr. Spurlock. I do not know his current salary.
I would think that we should, going into this contract negotiation.
Yeah, Mr. Odom's current salary is what we have plugged in the contract now.
While we're looking for that, can you tell us more about the origin of the TOS summary information that you have? How did we go about getting that, and who's provided that?
I called TOS and asked them, do you have information pertaining to director of school salaries in Tennessee, or any kind of reports where you have recently gathered that? They had some information on their website, but it was old. It was several years old. So I called and talked to them to see if they had any current information this week. And they did have this information. They emailed it to me. That's where it came from.
Do we know how many schools are in this information? I mean, it indicates these average salaries, but it doesn't indicate how many schools they've put together into this.
TOS indicated it was I don't know that they had every county in Tennessee. They didn't. They said it was their comprehensive survey based on all the counties in Tennessee is what they said. They did not provide the detailed information which TSBA had per county, because they said apparently they agreed with the director of schools not to give specific information on a per county basis on this report. TSBA does have it already in a per county basis on the report, which you'll see.
I also looked at the TOS website, and this was source TOS District Self-Reported 2018. Seems like pretty up-to-date information that they had, and they had the the superintendent average salary at $118,248. Now, that does not break it down per school system, but they also had other areas that did break it down per school system and even by gender on the TOS website.
Well, what they sent me, which says, if you look at this Tennessee statewide contract information, there's a sheet for that would appear to cover.
Sheet?
It's one of the ones I handed to you tonight.
Okay.
Tennessee state, it's labeled Tennessee statewide contract information.
I see that.
And this is what they provided. That was their statewide compilation of it, which is based on school system size. You see, but you do see an average base salary of $119,303, but that includes the school systems that are very small.
Yeah, in fact, on their website, they identify that over 88% of their school systems in Tennessee pay less than $150,000.
Right, because there are probably very few, I don't know how many, very few school systems the size of us, between 25,000 plus. You'll see the information they show here with students, with districts of 25,000 plus students. The average base salary last year was $226,400, and average median was $198,500.
What we need to do here, I would think, is go back to the first page and let's, before we get too far in this conversation, I have no objection to anything we've said so far particularly, but we're going to have to decide what we want to put in the contract. And the first order of business that came up there was the link to the contract. So I'd like to have some conversation on that if we could, and tell Mr. Reed what to put in, rather than hop through this contract page, another page, and then go back and all of that. Let's just keep it in some kind of order.
Mr. Reed was, Mr. Gill, was he 3 years?
3 years, yes.
He didn't have any experience?
Not as director of schools, no.
Mr. Estes can correct me, but it seems like the meetings we went to in both Boston and Denver, although not every state was the same, they recommended 3.
That's correct.
I'm just passing that along. I have no problem with 3, but you may.
I remember making the argument when Mr. Odom was put in place that it could be thought of as a year to get familiar, a year to implement, and a year to correct. And so I agree that 3-year contract is the right direction.
We're going to need to vote on each specific item, or just to...
I don't know that you need to vote. I mean, we can if we need to. If there's disagreements, if there's consensus on 3 years being appropriate, we don't have to vote on every point. We can vote on the thing as a whole. To the extent there's differences of opinion, we may have to vote on things item by item.
Well, I will tell you, if there is a wide difference of opinion on the salary, I'm going to have to request, and I'm not going to be willing to vote until I can get the additional information that I requested as
Yeah, right.
The length of service and the years of experience in that level of a position that these other superintendents are making.
I will, while we were talking, Mr. Sandvig got the information on Mr. Spurlock's current salary,
Okay.
and this is based on a 230-day contract as opposed to a year-long contract. And this is $110,376.
That's 230-day contract.
Yes, sir.
So how does that equate out, Mr. Sandvig, to a full year? Or it's,
Historically,
Let me
we
understand.
have had a higher index for the director of schools than we would for a principal at one of the comprehensive schools. If you took that daily rate, I think it came out to 124, yeah, just under 125,000 at the same daily rate. But that would be at the same index.
right,
That one of our major high school principals.
correct, which is what, yeah, what I was asking for. Thank you.
Can we come to agreement on the 3 years or to make sure that we're?
I'm okay with 3 years, but I did ask Mr. Reed today, and he gave me the same answer just a minute ago. Do we need to vote on every single thing? And you were a little hazy on that, but
I don't think you need to vote on every single thing. If there's disagreement, though, if we have disagreement on the term, we have disagreement on the years, on the salary, we need to probably vote on it, those items.
Okay, well, let's do it in order. Are we all right with 3 years? And if we need to have a motion for something else or a discussion for something other than 3 years, then by all means say so. Okay.
It sounds like to me 3 years is acceptable.
I believe that we're okay there. Yes, I think. Okay. Next thing you came to was what?
Salary.
Okay. Sound like we're going to have to vote on salary. If there's a motion made.
I don't know, but the current Mr. Odom's current salary is $156,316. So that's what Mr. Odom's current salary is. And of course, if he had stayed with us another year, he would get the additional 2%, whatever the salary is going to be for certified employees for going to next school year. Have that.
Mr. Odom's also been in the position for 6 years.
Correct.
I recollect when we hired Mr. Odom, we gave him what Mr. Gill was making at the time. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Mr. Reed, how long would it take us to pull together the information that I've requested in terms of the comparison salaries throughout the state for comparable positions and length of experience and time in the position?
Well, I don't know. I don't think. Well, TOS cannot release it because I asked specifically for the information from TOS. And they said they have agreed with their director of schools not to release their information on a per county basis. They only release averages. So you're not going to get that information from TOS. TSBA, I don't know that they have gathered I don't know if they have information on how long a director has served in their office. So I don't know whether they have it or not with regard to that.
But we have the actual salaries that all those superintendents are currently at.
Correct, yes. So I called them and the reason we have this is I called TSBA and said, have you gathered current information on director of school salaries in Tennessee? They said, yes, we do have that. I said, can you send that to me? And they sent it to me. This is what they sent.
But if, for instance, you were to call, I'll just use the Maury County again as an example, their school board or their director of HR, and just ask for information on how long that superintendent has been in that position and whether or not they had been in a superintendent's position before they took that, I would think that surely that's something that they would answer for us.
I would think they would, yes.
Mr. Reed, what Mr. Gill's salary was when he started?
I cannot tell you what it was when he started, no.
Where did we get his salary from? Previously?
Yes. Usually the contracts have tracked the previous director of schools contracts amount.
So that's typically past practice.
Yes.
Okay. I'm ready to move on with what you have in this contract as far as the base salary.
I'm sorry now, was that a motion of some sort, or you just?
I'm just letting you know I'm fine with what we got here. I mean, it's past practice. We're still way below the average, so I'm good with it.
Okay, you're all, okay. All right. You made that so simple I was unable to understand it. You're willing to start Mr. Spurlock at this salary that he's already plugged in, which is the current salary of the director. And we know we are conscious of the fact that we are too low, and there's a number of variables here, and Ms. Moore has pointed out some of those, and rightly so. But there's also the variable of how many schools we've got compared to Columbia, Maury County. There's also variables as to how much experience in various classrooms and various positions that a director might have. And I have no idea what that is, which I guess is her whole point. And I know for certain they don't have 46,000 students and 48, soon to be 48, right, schools. So there's a lot of things to consider when you start looking at salary.
Well, when you look at Mr. Odom's original contract, Mr. Chairman, if I may, we started him at $140,000, and that was his first entry into this large school system as a superintendent as well. So, again, I'm not real inclined to want to vote for a salary tonight without having the information that I've requested.
Mr. Reed, in thinking about this, I looked at the possibility of setting in this contract a salary for year 1, year 2, and year 3. And my thinking there was that a year ago, I suggested that Mr. Odom might get more than just the same salary increase as every other teacher, because it was apparent to me that the director of schools position in Rutherford County was out of step with similar systems. And Mr. Odom, for various reasons, said, thanks but no thanks. And it just was an awkward circumstance. I just wonder if it may be appropriate, or would you think from a contractual reason it would be inappropriate for us to set a salary for year 1, year 2, and year 3 at this time?
The board has discretion. If you want to go ahead and set the salary today for year 1, year 2, and year 3, you can do that, should you choose to do that.
What it would allow the board to do is to acknowledge some of the things that Ms. Moore has brought up with experience and things of that nature, and yet put in place an acceleration circumstance that if there is success, and we certainly hope that there is, then the salary could be pulled into a better position. And if we find ourselves looking again, then we've made a little progress with the decision that we're making right now. I'm really offering that just for other board members to consider, because I wanted to kind of address this a year ago, and it just, we couldn't get there. And I looked at this as the possibility of an opportunity that we might be able to do that.
Is it possible, I mean, there's nothing that prohibits the new board next year at this time to consider an increase in the second year, to consider an increase in the third year. Is that correct?
Correct. They can do that. The contract can be amended between the board and the director at any time.
Is it in the contract how often we do evaluations?
Yes, it's in once a year. Yes, you have annual evaluation.
So perhaps it might be focused on that, because to me that would, I don't necessarily agree with setting a salary in advance. You know, I think those kind of increases should be performance-based, based on performance appraisals.
which I think is a reasonable thing to do.
Other than, of course, the index. Is that what you were going to bring up, Mr. Sandvik?
I did want to make a point, if I may.
Please.
Moving back a bit when we were discussing Mr. Odom's starting salary, he has just received whatever raise the teachers have had each of these years. So this 156,316, basically it's been cost of living since he came in as director. In some years it didn't hit cost of living range.
And there's no doubt, based on Mr. Odom's years of experience and the size of our system, he was probably underpaid compared to other systems in Middle Tennessee. I think everyone would agree on that.
I agree with Mr. Young. I'm good because of what we've done, what past boards have done and what we've done in the past. It's just to continue with what you already have in this prospective contract.
I guess I'm okay as well. I don't know, so something about setting the salary 2 and 3 years in advance. I don't like that, but on the other hand, we're so far behind. You know, perhaps that's something we might want to consider. But I think Ms. Moore's probably right. That's probably, maybe that's something that we shouldn't do. We'll point out, though, of course, and Mr. Holliday's already kind of mentioned it, is that we are a little bit hampered here because Mr. Odom had no real interest in receiving any raises, and certainly never campaigned for any, to my knowledge, in the 3 years that I've been here, or almost 4 now. He never mentioned it. So we knew he was behind, and the position itself was behind, and we didn't do anything about it. But we will have an opportunity in the future to do that. And I point out that if he started at 140,000 and he ended up at 156,000 after 6 years, he actually, I mean, you can figure up the percentage yourself. He got less than the teachers did. Nowhere near did the position keep up with the cost of living or anything else, for that matter. So eventually we're going to have to face this, which many of you have said before. But I'm all right. I'm going to kind of agree with what Mr. Young said. Anybody else want to make a comment? Please do so.
We discussed the possibility of what would a search have looked like had the pay been $180,000 or something of that nature. And I just, again, renew the idea that if we were to, just to throw this out, if we were to say year 1, 145, year 2, 162, year 3, 178, then we would make advances toward somewhere we think we want to go, and yet we would have in place, you know, some reasons for what we're doing now and in the future. And we would find ourselves 3 years from now better than we find ourselves now, as opposed to saying, well, gee, there's nothing we can do about it. And Mr. Odom certainly was deserving, and we found ourselves challenged to be able to reward him. I don't know why we think that the landscape will be easier in the future. I just think it's worth considering. It's something that I kicked around.
Jordan, I make a general comment.
Yes, sir.
I'm in agreement also with Mr. Young's view.
Well, Board, I think it would be prudent to get a motion and a second on $156,316. This may be the only thing we vote on, but I think we probably ought to vote on that.
Chairman, I'll make the motion.
Okay, Ms. Michaels, you okay with that? Need a second, please.
Second.
Mr. Estes, thank you. All in favor of that motion, if there's no discussion? Hadn't already taken place, anything? All in favor of that motion, please say aye. Aye. Is there opposition to that figure?
There is.
Okay, note that it's 6-1?
I will abstain from voting as previously.
5-1 and an abstention. Thank you, Board. Mr. Reed, what was the next
I don't
item?
know that I don't know of any other specific provision here really. Well, it was one thing here with respect to when do we want to establish goals and objectives in paragraph 11. Currently, we have in here within 60 days after July 1st, 2018. So you're going to have a new board coming on, so I don't know if you want the old board establishing those or whether you want the new board establishing those.
I don't care for the 60 days because school is out for the first 30 of them. I don't know how the board feels about that, but at any rate, and at the end of that 30 days, we're going to have at least we're going to have 2 new board members. We now know that. So, if we keep the 60, they will have 30 days to have input. If we extend that to 90 days or 120 days or whatever you choose.
I guess I would point out that isn't it appropriate to have goals and objectives before the school year starts?
Let me read this thing again. On page 6, if you're looking for it. System of attainable and measurable goals and objectives for the ensuing school year and an implementation plan. They're in writing. Prior to the beginning of each school year, the board and director will meet to establish board goals and objectives for the next succeeding school year. Well, this is awkward, isn't it? Starts July 1.
Well, actually, 60 days doesn't give the new board anything because my term does not officially end until August 31st.
That's correct. You're right. I was thinking of election, and it's not the election. You're right.
Took me a moment.
The 60 days came from Mr. Odom's contract, so that's what the origin of this is. This is what we had in Mr. Odom's contract when he first became director of schools. You need to make a determination if you want to have the goals be in place before the start of the school year and go ahead and do it. Of course, you've got the existing board who's going to be in place then, or deferring that to the new board after the election.
If you increased it to 90 days, as of August 2nd, you'll know who your 2 new board members are, and then that would give those 2 board members an opportunity to have input with the director, and then it gives them 30 days of serving to be involved also. So.
That's correct, but it doesn't address what Mr. Holliday just said, which is theoretically here. I know we're July 1 is the first day of actual directorship from Mr. Spurlock, so we're going to meet with him at a board meeting or whatever right after that, after the 4th, I guess, and we're going to set some goals, attainable and measurable goals. So the new board is not going to have anything to say about it, no matter how many days you add.
It's true. Can't change the election, to the best of my knowledge.
No, I'm pretty sure that's true. That's why I said it was awkward. You do that, then you have 2 other people that come on, and the school year starts, and Mr. Spurlock has been in office for a week. Doesn't None of that seems right, but that's what it says here.
Well, it says within 60 days. It does not say necessarily the first week.
Well, no, but I mean, board, help me out here.
I'm comfortable with the language that's written.
I don't know whether I am or not, but I think it's all right. If it's worked, it seems to have worked. I don't remember any controversy on it, so I guess we'd probably be all right. Anybody feel strongly enough about this to offer a change to that? If not, we're going to leave the 60 days as is.
Sounds like we're going to leave it 60 days.
Okay.
The one thing the rest of this is really the same thing we've had for Mr. Odom's contract, with the exception of the items I pointed out to update this and incorporate the existing policies. But Section 12 does deal with the evaluation of the director of schools. Report up. Ms. Moore asked about that. And you will have to be evaluating the director of schools annually. That's required by state law. That's what we do anyway. At least 90 days prior to the evaluation, we have to tell the director of schools what standards we're going to use to measure his evaluation by. So that's something we have to keep in place, get in place 90 days prior to that evaluation taking place. That's the same thing as what we've been doing. So I just point that out, just so you know that's in there. And then if the board wants to consider salary increases, that's something you can just consider after the evaluation, should you choose to do. A future board can do that. With the exception of that, I think there's, unless there's specific questions, I think the rest of it is fairly, I would characterize as routine with respect to the contract for director of schools.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to add Board of Education Policy 5.50 as well as 5.501 there in Section 13. 5.501 is certainly the model by which grievances are resolved, but 5.50 are the definitions of what those grievances may be. And I think that these two policies coincide. It's the reason why 5.501 is a 3-number policy, and I'd like to add 5.50.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
What are the other comments or sections, or you want reviewed or repeated?
I thought it was notable in the contract that it referenced Tennessee Code 49-5-501 and 49.5-511. As a board member, I went and looked at these as well as the documents that code referenced. I would encourage my fellow board members to take a look at those documents as well.
Do you want Mr. Reed to come up with a finished product? I assume this is it, but I mean a finished paper product for you to hold in your hands and look at again before we're not approving the contract. We're sort of approving the contract that is to be presented to Mr. Spurlock, and we discuss that with him. You and I do that together, or the entire board, or what do we do?
No, I would just I would email it to Mr. Spurlock and ask him to review it, and if he has any comments, to call me with any comments, and then report back to the board.
So we're making a motion somebody will make a motion to make this offer, to offer the contract.
That is correct.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Estes. I need a second for that, please.
Second.
Young, thank you. Further comment from board members? All in favor of that motion then, as presented, please say aye. Aye. Is there opposition to that?
Yes.
Once again, I will abstain from voting for the same reason as before on the salary question, that I was requesting more information before making a decision on that.
Ms. Michaels, we okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Board, if you have your schedule there in front of you, we have, we don't have to do this tonight, but Ms. Michaels has kind of indicated that it might be a good idea. We do have some meetings on here that are not going to take place. That would be April 16th, Director Search, April 23rd, April 26th. All that is Director Search meetings. Doesn't sound like to me we're going to need any of those. Are we? We have work session on the 17th, budget the 18th, board meeting on the 19th. That's the next time we'll get together, and I would assume that Mr. Reed will report back to us with what Mr. Spurlock has to say, and with copies for everyone as well. He's nodding yes, so that's a good sign. All right, board, I'm going to, Ms. Michaels, we're probably going to need a new copy of our meetings, but as far as I can tell, nobody's saying anything, so I guess we can drop the 16th and 23rd and 26th from our meeting schedule, leaving us with budget, work session, and board meetings. Is there anything else, board? Something I've left out, forgotten about?
Mr. Chairman, the community has shared with me a continued interest in school security, and I believe that it is appropriate for our board to meet and discuss, hear from our coordinator Josh Kubley and others from the central office to examine our current state of security, as well as any improvements as the governor is pledging additional funds in that area. And I've discussed this with Mr. Reed as well, and it does seem that it would be appropriate for our board to have a meeting where the only topic is school security. I would encourage the chairman to examine that possibility and schedule that as soon as possible.
We can do that as an executive session if we choose, can we not, Mr. Reed? You can, yes. As long as we're discussing school security.
Yes. You may want to talk to the sheriff's office about having some representatives there as well at that meeting, so you can discuss the specific plans and details they have should any contingencies arise.
All right.
You don't have to have the sheriff's office there, so if you don't want them there, you don't have to. But I'll just say it might be useful to have the sheriff's office there to tell you what specific plans they have in place to address any of those issues should they arise, because that's something the board probably needs to review.
I believe we could have it without the sheriff's department, y'all. I don't see how it would be a very productive meeting.
You know, I would be inclined to think, based on what Mr. Holliday said, and we've talked about it before, that we intended to and needed to have a meeting to start this whole conversation. Mr. Blair's mentioned before the need to possibly look at adding more SROs. And I understand the reasoning for doing it in a private session, because you don't want to release certain information about your security plans to the public, because then you're just kind of opening that whole door for that. But my thoughts are, and I know this might be more meetings, but it certainly, this is such a serious topic, and we've got so much to talk about, and we have so many people out in our community that have valuable input to offer on this. I mean, I know I've already received things like on Facebook posts and things about, why don't you think about this, why don't you do this, and some of them are ideas that I was like, wow, I didn't ever think about that, that perhaps it might behoove us to first initially do a public meeting and even allow the public to have some input, whether they want to come speak as visitors or what have you, just to kind of talk generalities and where we want to head. And then once we start getting into the nuts and bolts of the specifics of how we're going to improve our security plan, do that as a closed-door meeting with the attorney.
Can't, not that you're suggesting this at all, we're not going to discuss, we're not going to tell the public everything that we're doing.
No.
That is obvious, I think. And by the way, in one way, that's bad, because the public thinks, I believe, that we don't do all that much. You know, that they're not aware because we can't tell them. So that does present some kind of a problem. Let me think about that a little bit.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
There are a number of communities around the state, and I think some school boards have entertained the public. There's also been law enforcement departments, but they've actually had meetings where the public has come in to share the ideas, like Ms. Moore just explained, and also be reassured by the law enforcement community that we know that there are bad actors out there, and we're preparing for them. Sometimes they just need to be reassured, but I think they probably would like to share their thoughts with us too.
I did speak, and he'll be able to speak for himself, because I imagine he'll probably come himself. I did speak with Sheriff Fitzhugh, I don't know, a week ago, maybe a little more, and I've known the sheriff a long time, and he's totally, as far as I know, totally honest, above board guy. He's got the same budget problems we've got. Exactly the same stuff. And he asked me, and I think we can identify with this, you know, what he said. He said, I am unable to get this and enough deputies for this. We're growing so fast, and it just sounded like us, you know, and it puts a tremendous amount of pressure on Mr. Gurley's here, on him and his 20 friends in the county commission to fund all this. But anyway, I did have this conversation with the sheriff, and he is absolutely sympathetic, and I think in agreement. And his feeling, of course, for school children and public safety is intense. Obviously, that's his job.
What would be the possibility of using one of these meetings that we have 3 meetings that we had set aside for the director search? What about utilizing one of those meetings as an opportunity for the community to share their thoughts?
I think we could definitely do that. We would have to, you're talking about a public meeting? And then schedule an executive session meeting at a later time?
Chairman, I would point out that if we had a listening session on the 23rd, then while those ideas were fresh in our mind, we could follow that with the executive session on the 26th, and that might be far enough in advance that notice could be given to any members of law enforcement that we might want to invite to be with us on the 23rd or the 26th.
Yeah, I should think we would want them at both of those meetings. I mean, their role in this is so critical. So.
All right, let me think about that a little bit.
I would also make sure it doesn't conflict with the county commission or health and ed, so maybe some of those guys can be here if they'd like to attend.
Okay, Ms. Michaels and I will get together on the possible dates. Yes.
We had a webinar with the state on the governor's proposed, I don't think it's passed yet. We also need to, we may not know what limitations we have on spending this money at the time of that meeting. So we'll have to, it's going to be a grant type process, kind of like our current Safe Schools, but a lot more money. So we may not have all the answers on how we
Okay.
Mr. Sandvig, are you referring to the money from the state? Okay, and if I'm not mistaken, that's one-time money, right?
Most of it is one time.
Okay.
It looks as though our core Safe Schools allocation is a little over 200,000 will be doubled as an ongoing piece. But that number has been pretty flat for a long time.
These meetings, though, are going to be more informational, and so those numbers will probably be valuable in the future.
The enemy is complacency.
That's one of them. Sure is. This is it's tough on a lot of people. They want to do something, and they don't know what to do. They see the cost, and they think, well, maybe not. It's, and you watch the news and change your mind. Maybe, probably. Anything else, board? I'm gonna think about those dates. Save them. I think 16th is probably too early. So just eliminate that meeting. And Ms. Michaels and I will get together probably tomorrow and see if this other idea Mr. Holliday had there for the 23rd, 26th is feasible, if we can do that. Anything else? Thank you so much for your input and your approach to this. I deeply appreciate it. We're adjourned.